She arrived at the mansion in the late afternoon wearing a simple borrowed uniform with careful hands smoothing the fabric, as she stepped through tall doors that echoed with wealth and confidence. And she kept her eyes lowered not from shame, but habit, because years of working service jobs had taught her that silence made the day easier. And this party was unlike any other she had worked before, with marble floors polished to mirror shine, crystal lights hanging above like frozen stars, and guests moving in elegant clothing, speaking casually about money, travel, and influence as if these things were as ordinary as breathing. And she moved quietly between them, carrying trays, listening without reacting, because her role was to serve and disappear. And no one noticed her except when they needed something, and the host, a well-known millionaire, moved through the room with loud laughter and sharp confidence, enjoying the attention of his guests and the power he felt in controlling the space and the evening, and he barely acknowledged the staff except to issue instructions or jokes, and the waitress followed orders calmly, though inside she felt the familiar tightening that came whenever she entered places built on excess, because it reminded her of a past she rarely spoke about, and a life that had taken a different path. And as the guests gathered near the grand piano placed prominently in the room more as decoration than instrument, the host made a comment about how it was rarely played, and how talent was something money could easily buy, and laughter followed, and some about letting a random person try, and the host's eyes landed on the waitress standing nearby, and he smiled not kindly but with curiosity and amusement. And without knowing her story or her history, he called her forward, suggesting she sit at the piano as entertainment, and the room reacted with mixed laughter, curiosity, and surprise, and the waitress froze, briefly feeling the weight of many eyes and the familiar feeling of being underestimated, and she considered declining, but years of swallowing discomfort had taught her how to stay composed, and she stepped forward quietly toward the piano as whispers followed her. And she noticed the shine of the keys, the perfect tuning, the untouched beauty of the instrument, and memories stirred inside her, memories of childhood lessons, long nights practicing alone, and a dream she had once protected carefully before life demanded sacrifices. And she sat down gently, feeling the bench beneath her, and the room settled not with respect but anticipation of embarrassment, and she placed her hands on her lap for a moment, grounding herself, breathing slowly, and she did not look at the host or the guests, because this moment was not about them. And as she lifted her hands toward the keys, she felt the past and present meet, and the room waited, unaware that something real was about to begin. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. The room grew quieter as she adjusted her position on the bench, and although many faces still carried smiles meant for amusement, there was a subtle shift as people leaned in, slightly curious to see how this would unfold. And the millionaire host crossed his arms, confident that the moment would end in awkward laughter and confirm his unspoken assumptions. And the waitress rested her fingers lightly above the keys, not yet playing but listening to the silence and to herself, because she had learned long ago that music begins before sound. And she took a slow breath, allowing her shoulders to relax and her thoughts to settle. And in that instant, the noise of the room, wealth, the judgment, and the expectations faded into the background, and she was no longer standing in a mansion, but in a familiar inner space shaped by years of quiet practice and personal resolve. And when she finally pressed the first key, the sound was gentle, controlled, and intentional, not rushed or uncertain. And a few guests raised their brows, surprised that the note did not stumble, and then a second followed, and a third, forming a simple opening phrase that carried balance and purpose, and the laughter, not suddenly but naturally, as people realized something unexpected was happening. And the waitress continued playing, choosing each note carefully, allowing the melody to unfold with patience and clarity. And the piano responded with a rich tone, filling the room with warmth and drawing attention away from conversation and status, and towards sound and expression. And the host shifted his stance slightly, no longer smiling as confidently, because this was not going the way he had imagined. And the guests closest to the piano turned fully toward her, their expressions changing from curiosity to focus. And the waitress remained composed, her posture upright, her movements fluid and practiced. And she did not rush to impress or exaggerate her playing, because she did not need to prove anything to anyone. And the melody began to develop, gaining depth and emotion as her hands moved with growing confidence, shaped by years of discipline rather than performance. And some guests exchanged glances, unsure of how to react, because the situation had quietly reversed, and what was meant to be a joke was becoming something sincere and absorbing. And a woman near the back lowered her drink, forgotten in her hand, as the music stirred memories she had not thought about in years. And a man who prided himself on his refined taste felt a knot form in his chest as he recognized real artistry when he heard it. And the waitress allowed the music to guide her rather than her awareness of the room. And she played as she always had for herself, honest, restrained, and deeply connected to feeling rather than applause. And the piano, now fully alive, carried her sound through the space, softening even the sharpest expressions. And as the melody continued to grow, the atmosphere of the party changed from social noise to shared attention. And people who had moments earlier been talking over one another now stood still, listening. And the host looked around, sensing that control was slipping, not through confrontation, but through something far more powerful and humbling. And the waitress played unsteady and grounded, her face calm and focused. And the room waited, not for her to fail but to hear what came next. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the music continued to flow, the change in the room became impossible to ignore. And what had started as casual curiosity transformed into genuine attention, as guests found themselves drawn toward the piano without making a conscious decision. And the waitress remained focused on the keys, her expression calm and steady. if she were alone despite the crowd surrounding her, and the melody deepened, slowly revealing layers of emotion shaped by years of lived experience rather than rehearsed performance. And people began to sense that this was not a trick or a lucky moment, but the voice of someone who truly understood music. And the piano seemed to respond to her touch, offering a rich, balanced sound that filled the grand room and softened its sharp edges, and the laughter that once defined the party faded, completely replaced by an almost reverent stillness. And the millionaire host stood frozen for a moment, watching as his guests no longer looked at him, but at the woman he had tried to belittle. And his confidence wavered, not because she challenged him directly, but because her presence quietly shifted the center of the room, and the waitress played with restraint, allowing space between phrases, letting each note breathe and settle. And that patience carried more power than speed or volume, and a few guests felt their throats tighten as memories surfaced. Moments from their own lives when they had set aside passions or underestimated others, and the music seemed to speak to those unspoken regrets and acknowledgments. And a woman who had spent her life in elite circles felt tears gather unexpectedly, because the melody reminded her of a talent she once abandoned for social expectations. And a man who built his identity around success felt humbled, realizing how little wealth had to do with the depth of what he was hearing. And the waitress remained unaware of these individual reactions, yet she sensed the collective stillness and allowed it to guide her without altering her intention, and her hands moved with quiet confidence shaped by discipline and adaptation. And she adjusted instinctively to the piano, responding to its tone and resistance as if in conversation, and the melody evolved, growing more expressive without becoming dramatic, and each transition felt intentional and honest. And the guests, now fully engaged, leaned in, not physically but emotionally, and the room felt smaller, more intimate, as if the walls themselves were listening. And the host swallowed hard, feeling a mix of disbelief and discomfort, because the moment he had orchestrated for amusement had become a reflection of his own arrogance. And for the first time that evening, he felt exposed, not attacked but seen. And the waitress continued playing, grounded and composed, her breathing steady, her shoulders relaxed, and her expression unchanged. And she was no longer a background presence, but the gathering, and the guests understood this intuitively and offered her something she had not been given before in that space: respect and attention. And the piano carried her sound through the room, weaving together emotion, memory, and restraint. And the music spoke of perseverance, of quiet nights and unseen effort, and of choosing responsibility over recognition. And though no words were spoken, everyone felt the message clearly, and the atmosphere of the party transformed from display to reflection, and people stood still, unwilling to break the moment. And as the melody reached a gentle pause, she allowed silence to exist without fear, trusting it as part of the expression, and the room remained silent, not awkwardly but willingly. And in that shared stillness, something shifted permanently, and the guests were no longer watching a waitress play a piano. They were listening to a human story unfolding through sound. And the waitress continued her playing, allowing the music to move forward naturally. And the room waited with humility and openness, aware that what was happening could not be undone or dismissed, and that the night would be remembered not for its luxury but for this unexpected truth revealed. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, yet it was calm and respectful. And within that stillness, the waitress continued without lifting her gaze, because she was no longer reacting to the room, but listening inwardly to where the music wanted to go next. And her hands moved into a new passage that carried steady rhythm and quiet strength, suggesting motion and purpose rather than display. And the guests sensed the shift and adjusted their attention even further, some stepping closer, others standing straighter as if drawn by an unseen thread. And the piano filled the space with a sound that felt grounded and intentional. And the room that once echoed with laughter and conversation now held a shared focus that felt almost personal. And the millionaire host found himself unable to look away as the situation continued to unfold beyond his control, and he noticed how the guests no longer responded to his presence, but to the music and to the woman at the center of it. And that realization unsettled him, because he had built his identity around command and influence. And now those things meant nothing in this moment, and the waitress played with a confidence that did not seek approval, and that quiet assurance carried more authority than any command. And the melody suggested endurance shaped by routine, effort, and unseen discipline, and people began to recognize parts of their own lives in the sound: early mornings, long days, responsibilities accepted without praise, and the quiet pride that comes from doing what must be done. And a man near the window who had always measured success in numbers felt a strange warmth rise in his chest, as the music reminded him of his father, who had worked tirelessly without ever seeking recognition. And he felt an unexpected respect for the life he had once. And a woman standing beside him thought of years spent supporting others while setting aside her own interests, and she felt seen without explanation. And the waitress remained steady, her posture relaxed, her movements efficient and expressive. And she adjusted instinctively to the piano, responding to its tone and resistance as if it were a familiar partner. And the melody grew slightly fuller, supported by simple harmonies that gave the sound stability and direction. And the guests listened deeply, some with eyes closed, others with softened expressions, because the music invited reflection rather than spectacle. And the host shifted his weight, uneasily realizing that what he had framed as entertainment had become a mirror reflecting his own assumptions. And the power imbalance he had enjoyed moments earlier now felt fragile and irrelevant. And he felt a tightening in his chest, not from anger, but from the uncomfortable awareness that he had misjudged someone profoundly. And the waitress continued playing without acknowledgement. This internal shift, because her focus remained on the music and on the quiet truth she was expressing. and the room seemed to breathe with her phrases rising and settling naturally. And the chandelier lights above reflected softly on the piano surface, creating a warmth that matched the tone of the moment, and a young guest who had grown up surrounded by privilege felt something unfamiliar stir within her because the music suggested a richness not tied to comfort or status, but to persistence and sincerity. She realized how little she understood about lives lived outside her own, and the melody moved forward with subtle variations, returning briefly to earlier themes now reshaped by confidence and experience. And the guests recognized this, instinctively feeling the continuity of a story unfolding, and the piano responded with clarity and depth, and the sound filled the room completely, leaving no space for distraction or judgment. And the host noticed how even those who once laughed now stood quietly with expressions of respect and curiosity, and he felt a sense of embarrassment, not public but personal, because he recognized the ease with which he had used someone else as a momentary amusement. And the waitress remained composed and grounded, her breathing steady, her hands sure, and she allowed the music to unfold without rushing toward a climax or conclusion, because she was not performing for effect but speaking honestly, and the audience responded with complete attention and presence, and the party atmosphere had transformed into something intimate and reflective, and people no longer thought about appearances or roles because those distinctions had faded, and the music continued to carry themes of resilience and dignity, and the beauty found in perseverance, and listeners felt the weight of that message settle gently within them, and the room seemed suspended in a moment outside of time where wealth and status had no relevance and only shared humanity remained, and the waitress felt a quiet alignment between her past, present, and she realized that every choice, every sacrifice, and every silent hour of practice had led her here, not to a stage, but to a moment of truth, and the melody reflected that realization with calm assurance and warmth, and the guests felt it as a collective understanding, and the host stood still watching as the center of the room belonged fully to someone he had underestimated, and the power of that reversal lay not in confrontation but in grace and restraint. And as the music continued, room remained silent and open, and the story carried forward with depth and honesty. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the performance carried on, the waitress felt a subtle shift within herself, as if the weight she had carried for years was easing and allowing her to stand more fully in the present moment. And that change reflected in her playing, which grew calmer and more assured without becoming louder or more dramatic. And the guests sensed this immediately because the music now held a balance of strength and peace that felt earned rather than performed, and the piano responded warmly, and she guided the melody with steady confidence shaped by long experience and quiet discipline. And the room remained deeply attentive with no movement or whisper, because everyone felt that something honest was unfolding, and the millionaire host watched closely, now aware that the moment had moved far beyond his control. And he felt an unfamiliar humility settle in as he realized that status and power offered no protection from truth, and the waitress played with clarity, allowing earlier themes to return, now softened and enriched by understanding, and listeners felt the continuity of a life expressed through sound. And a man near the center of the room felt his chest tighten as the music reminded him of years spent chasing recognition while neglecting what truly mattered, and he lowered his gaze, feeling exposed yet grateful. And a woman beside him felt a quiet reassurance as the melody affirmed that unseen effort holds its own value and meaning. And the waitress remained grounded, her posture relaxed, her breathing steady, and her movements precise and economical. And she did not seek the eyes of the audience because her focus remained on honoring the music rather than the moment, and the melody flowed with gentle confidence, reflecting acceptance rather than struggle. And the guests responded with softened expressions and steady attention, and the atmosphere felt warm and shared as if everyone present had been invited. Same understanding, and the host noticed how the laughter that once filled the room felt distant and inappropriate, now replaced by respect and reflection. And he recognized that his attempt to humiliate had instead revealed something far greater and more humbling. And the waitress continued playing with quiet assurance, allowing the sound to speak without explanation. And the piano carried her voice through the space, filling it with dignity and sincerity. And the room held the moment, carefully aware that it was witnessing something rare and meaningful, and the story carried forward with grace and truth. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the music moved into a deeper passage, the waitress allowed herself to explore emotions she rarely shared even with herself. And the melody slowed slightly, carrying a sense of reflection and lived experience that felt intimate and sincere. And the guests sensed the shift immediately because the sound now held a weight that came not from sadness alone but from understanding and endurance, and the piano responded with a fuller tone, and she adjusted instinctively, shaping each phrase with care and restraint. And the room remained completely still as if everyone feared breaking the fragile honesty of the moment, and the millionaire host felt his earlier confidence dissolve, further replaced by an uncomfortable self-awareness, because the music no longer entertained but revealed, and it revealed how easily power can blind people to depth and humanity. And he stood quietly, absorbing the lesson without defense, and the waitress played with steady hands and relaxed shoulders, her breathing calm and her expression composed. And she remembered long nights when music had been her only outlet, after exhausting days when no one asked how she felt and no one noticed the quiet sacrifices she made. And those memories did not overwhelm her now, but grounded her, giving the music a steady emotional core that listeners felt immediately. And a woman near the doorway felt tears rise because the melody mirrored years she had spent caring for others without acknowledgement. and she felt a sense of release knowing she was not alone in that experience. And a man who prided himself on ambition felt a quiet ache as the sound reminded him of dreams he had set aside and people he had overlooked, and the music did not accuse but invited reflection, and that invitation was more powerful than judgment. And the waitress continued playing with patience, allowing space between phrases where silence spoke as clearly. A sound and the audience leaned into those moments feeling included rather than excluded, and the hall itself seemed to soften, holding the music gently, and the atmosphere felt stripped of pretense and performance. And the host noticed how the power dynamic had fully reversed, not through confrontation but through humility and authenticity, and he felt a deep respect forming that he could not ignore, and the waitress remained unaware of individual reactions yet sensed the collective stillness, and allowed it to guide her without altering her intention, and the melody evolved with subtle variations, returning to familiar themes now deeper and more reflective, and listeners recognized this, instinctively feeling the story of a life shaped by perseverance and quiet strength, and the room felt united in listening and understanding. And the music carried forward with honesty and restraint, preparing the way for what was to come. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the melody shifted again, the waitress allowed a gentle sense of light to enter her, playing not as celebration but as quiet acceptance and growth. And the music lifted slightly, carrying warmth and reassurance shaped by experience rather than innocence. And the guests felt the change and responded with softened faces and calmer breaths, as if the sound itself was offering comfort and understanding. And the piano sang under her hands, and she guided it with confidence that came from years of knowing herself and her limits, and the room felt warmer and more open, and the millionaire host stood silently, now no longer defensive or uneasy, but thoughtful, as he recognized that the moment was teaching him something he could not buy or control. And the waitress continued playing with ease, allowing the melody to flow naturally, and reflect moments of simple joy found within routine and responsibility, and listeners felt those moments clearly, and a young guest imagined a future where fulfillment did not depend on status, and an older guest felt gratitude for the life he had built through consistency rather than praise, and the music teacher in the room recognized the rare balance of skill and sincerity, and felt renewed respect for quiet dedication. And the waitress remained centered, her movements fluid and unforced, and she introduced gentle variations that felt like conversation rather than performance, and the audience listened without expectation, simply receiving what was offered, and the atmosphere felt peaceful and shared, as if the entire room had agreed to let go of judgment and assumption. And the host realized that his attempt to embarrass had instead revealed his own blindness, and he felt a sincere humility take root, and the music continued, carrying a sense of calm strength and possibility, and the room remained still and open, aware that the story was moving toward something meaningful and whole. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the music entered its final stretch, the waitress felt a sense of completeness settling within her, as if everything she had carried quietly for years was finally finding its place, and the melody became simpler but deeper, bringing together earlier themes with clarity and purpose. And the guests sensed this gathering of meaning, and listened with renewed stillness, because the sound now felt whole and resolved without being final, and the piano responded gently, and she touched the keys with care, allowing warmth and honesty to guide each note. And the room felt united in attention, free from distraction or expectation, and the millionaire host stood quietly, feeling a lasting change within himself, as he recognized that the true value of the moment came from listening rather than leading. And the guests no longer thought of the waitress by her role, but by her presence and the story she had shared through music. And a woman near the center felt a quiet release, as doubts she had carried for years softened and made space for peace. And a young listener felt reassured that a meaningful life could be built through patience and sincerity. And the waitress remained composed, her breathing steady, her posture relaxed, and her expression calm and focused, and she felt gratitude not for recognition, but for the chance to honor the part of herself she had protected quietly. And the melody carried that gratitude through the room, and the atmosphere felt complete and grounded, and everyone sensed that the moment was approaching a meaningful close, shaped by truth and shared understanding. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. As the final section approached, the waitress allowed the music to slow naturally, trusting the feeling rather than directing it, and her hands moved with gentle certainty, shaped by acceptance and calm. And the melody softened, carrying a sense of closure that felt earned through honesty and restraint. And the guests felt the change immediately, and no one shifted or spoke, because the moment felt too meaningful to interrupt. And the piano responded with a warm, steady tone, and she let each note settle fully before moving on, and the room felt suspended in a shared breath, and the millionaire host watched quietly, feeling a deep respect that replaced his earlier pride. And he understood that the power of the moment came from humility rather than control, and the guests felt connected not by status or wealth, but by the shared experience of listening and understanding. And the waitress remained composed, her face peaceful, her movements unhurried, and she felt a quiet affirmation, knowing that her devotion to music had always mattered, even when unseen. And the melody carried that truth gently through the space and prepared everyone for the ending that was about to arrive. And if any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. When the last notes faded, the waitress lifted her hands slowly and remained still, allowing the sound to leave the room with dignity. And the guests stayed silent, honoring what they had received. And then a wave of applause rose, not loud at first, but sincere and steady, and the millionaire host stepped forward, humbled and thankful, offering respect. Instead of pride, and the waitress stood quietly meeting the room with a gentle smile, knowing she had been seen not for her role, but for her truth, and the night ended changed for everyone present. And the story lived on as a lesson in listening, humility, and hidden talent. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them.